Like many, my story of advocacy starts with tragedy. On January 8th, 2011, I woke up on a cold, clear morning in Washington, D.C. Soon, I started receiving the kinds of messages no one expects, but that we all dread. My boss, Gabby Giffords, had been shot in the head from 3 feet away at a constituent meeting in Tucson, Arizona. I remember driving to work, hearing Gabby pronounced incorrectly dead on NPR. I walked into our office to colleagues already there, slumped into corners, grieving the loss of a shining light, a rising star, Gabby Giffords. Of course, she wasn't dead. She was in a Tucson hospital fighting for her life, but others weren't so lucky. My colleague, Gabe Zimmerman, was murdered, as was 9-year-old Christina Taylor Greene, born on 9/11. She wanted to be the president of the United States. She went to go visit that morning her congresswoman, Gabby, the woman she admired so much, but never got the chance to meet her. 19 were shot, 6 died. Day turned into night, night into day to night. It was a haze of tragedy. I knew enough at the time about gun violence not to be shocked that this had occurred, but I couldn't help but not being able to believe that it had happened sort of around me. I wanted to learn more about gun violence at that point. I remember sitting late at night at my desk, looking over the Capitol and typing into Google gun violence in America and being shocked at what I had learned. 30,000 Americans dead every year from gunshots. Even more shocking, though, was the fact that I was shocked. Here I was, a legislative director, somebody who was literally paid to write the nation's laws, to analyze and evaluate its policies. And I was basically unknowledgeable about one of the greatest sources of mortality for Americans, a source of terror and trauma for our children and our communities. But at that political moment, we were in a situation where our politics, our Congress, too many of our elected officials were in the grip of the gun lobby, where the NRA had built up a political machine, a set of influences over many, many years that not only stopped new policies from taking shape and being put into action that could try and stem this epidemic, but that cowed politicians from even trying. As we now know, Gabby didn't only survive, she fought for a robust recovery from being shot through one side of her brain from 3 feet away, and then to go on to lead a new national movement for safer gun laws. But even in the aftermath of the Tucson shooting, a member of Congress almost murdered at an official event. That history was far, far from being written. Gabby spent months in and out of hospitals and rehabilitation, putting every ounce of her strength and courage into surmounting the seemingly insurmountable. As she progressed in her recovery and had more perspective on what had happened to her and sort of broader problems in the world, she and Mark started thinking about what would their next chapter of public service be. And during that time, we saw horrific shootings around the country, of course, on a daily basis, where nearly 100 Americans die every day from gun violence. You saw the tragic shooting in Aurora, Colorado, at the movie theater. You had the horrific attack at the Oak Creek Sikh temple in Wisconsin. And then, in December of 2012, you had the massacre at Sandy Hook Elementary School in Newtown, Connecticut. that shooting perpetrated a psychic wound in our country. And for Gabby, it was no different. I remember being on the phone that day with Gabby and Mark, and just trying to grapple with the extent of this tragedy. 20 dead little children, 6 dead educators, a nation in mourning. But Gabby's voice was crystal clear. Enough, she said, enough. She and Mark knew that they weren't just survivors of gun violence, but that they could bring a vivid, new, unique voice to the gun violence prevention movement. They're not, like I said, just survivors, but also gun owners, Westerners, political moderates, people not from the coast, but from a state like Arizona. In the days that followed, we got to work hard trying to figure out what could this next step be. And what Gabby told me and my colleagues at the time was that this couldn't just be an organization. It had to be a new path forward, a new movement, centered not around what the sort of role of firearms in society might be, but fundamentally, how could we work with our nation's lawmakers at the state and federal level to put into place policies that would stop people from being shot, that would prevent gun violence, that was a public safety, a public health effort, and most importantly, do whatever we could to keep our children safe. So on the 2-year anniversary of Gabby being shot, we launched a new movement now called Giffords to try and level the political playing field with the gun lobby and change our culture around guns. In the opening days, it was very difficult. We lobbied Congress trying to pass what was called the Manchin-Toomey background checks bill. We knocked on doors, we wore out our proverbial soles on our shoes, talking to representatives and senators. Many were supportive, many more than had been in the past. However, we still ran into fear of the NRA, fear of the gun lobby. People told us that the politics were too difficult, that the NRA was too powerful, that it couldn't be done, that we should give up and try something different. But as Manchin-Toomey fell to a filibuster, a new movement across America was born. We realized quickly that the NRA's chief weapon, their chief resource, wasn't money and fear. It was hopelessness. Their primary product wasn't selling guns. It was selling a lack of hope. It was making Americans believe that gun violence is not solvable, that it's a naturally occurring phenomenon like a hurricane or an earthquake or a tornado, that we had everything to blame for gun violence except access to guns. It's poverty, bad parenting, video games, social media, mental illness, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Things that would take boiling an ocean to solve. But we started digging in on the policy, and we found that in fact wasn't true. That if you put in place common sense measures like universal background checks and gun permitting, that you'd be able to save the lives of thousands of people across the country. It can be difficult fighting gun violence, but we knew over the years that if we wanted to create change in policy, we first needed to change the politics. For decades, the issue of gun violence had been considered a political third rail. Politicians were scared to touch it. What we wanted to do was not just obliterate the notion that advocating for safer gun laws cost you votes, but to turn the conversation 180 degrees and totally realign the conversation, change the calculus, and get people elected because of, but not despite, their advocacy for stronger gun laws. So we put a plan into action. In 2016, we looked at the Senate map, we looked at who had voted against our Manchin-Toomey background checks bill, and we chose a political target, Senator Kelly Ayotte of New Hampshire. New Hampshire, of course, is the live free or die state, one of this country's top states for gun owners, a place where there would be a lot of skepticism about our ability to create an issue around her opposition to our background checks legislation. But we did our research, we rolled up our sleeves, and we spent millions of dollars communicating with Granite State voters about her record opposing universal background checks while accepting millions from the gun lobby. At the end of the day, on election day, when the votes were counted, we beat Kelly Ayotte, elected in her place a new senator, a new champion for gun safety. And that wasn't just important to add another vote to our column, but we made an example of somebody who had sided with the NRA instead of with us. In the years that followed, we knew we needed to do more. We had beta tested this notion that in a high-profile Senate race, we could beat somebody on this issue. So we wanted to take this sort of beta idea to market. The 2018 midterms loomed large, and over those sort of intervening years, this country was devastated time and time again by horrific shootings. You had the Las Vegas massacre, the deadliest mass shooting in American history. You had the horrific shooting at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland. The nation was angry. We were poised for change. So we again did our research, identified congressional districts across the country where we could go on the offense and beat NRA-backed incumbents, and taking our lessons from 2013, from 2016, we rolled up our sleeves and created a national narrative about the corruption of the NRA, their linkage to Republican incumbents, and the fact that we weren't able to pass common sense gun safety legislation like universal background checks into law. In the days after Election Day, it became very clear that we had won this conversation, we had won this debate decisively. We not only outspent the NRA, but we beat 40 NRA-backed Republican incumbents and elected in their place a gun safety majority, a majority in the House of Representatives that, not just sort of wanted to do the right thing on guns, but was elected to do the right thing on guns, and they did. In the opening weeks of the new Congress in 2019, they passed H.R. 8, the Bipartisan Background Checks Act, on a 50-vote margin, but that was stuck once it passed the House of Representatives because Mitch McConnell in the Senate and Donald Trump in the White House refused to act on that legislation. As America geared up for the 2020 presidential election, we organized a large-scale forum which every presidential candidate came to and talked with us and our supporters about the need for gun safety reforms. We filmed every single candidate talking about their thoughts on the gun violence prevention issues to share with our supporters. We encouraged them to adopt strong policies on gun safety because we knew that at the end of the primary, we needed a candidate who could draw a stark contrast with Donald Trump on the issue of gun safety. We needed somebody who's willing to stand up to the NRA. When the dust settled and Joe Biden was nominated as our presidential candidate and Kamala Harris as our vice presidential candidate. That's exactly what we got. And we are so proud that recently we had Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, who together constitute the strongest gun safety ticket in my lifetime, and I believe in the history of this country, elected to the White House. We now have a gun safety presidency. I think back to the months after Gabby was shot, when she had a decision whether to sort of sit back, give up, or to press ahead and plow forward. Gabby Giffords is somebody who, for every step that you see her take, for every word that you see her speak, because of her injuries, she must put hours upon hours upon hours of rehab and prep and practice and preparation into doing things that you and I take for granted. In many ways, the gun safety movement has been, in many ways, really, Gabby's recovery is a metaphor for the gun safety movement. It takes diligence, it takes hard work, resilience, grit, determination, and it takes a lot of courage. The courage to face long odds and to know that progress lies sometimes over the horizon, but that it's obtainable if you're willing to put in the work, if you're willing to work for hours and hours and hours to take that one step forward, knowing that after that one step comes another step. I like to say that things oftentimes seem very difficult and that change comes very slowly before it starts coming all at once. I think because of the hard work of survivors like Gabby Giffords, because of the courage of common sense gun owners, because of millions of Americans across the country willing to stand up, that now is the time when change is going to start happening more quickly. And I know that if we're able to succeed in that change, to have a successful gun safety presidency thanks to Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, that's not just going to be the culmination of a successful social movement in this country, but it's going to save thousands of people's lives in this country, maybe the life of somebody that you love.